All right, today we're jumping into what might just be the most influential letter ever written, Paul's epistle to the Romans. We're going to break down those first 17 verses. I mean, this is the passage that laid a foundation that has shaped history for, 2 millennia now. So that brings up a big question, right? How do you even begin a letter that's going to change the world? What kind of groundwork do you have to lay? That's exactly what we're going to dig into. How the Apostle Paul opens his masterpiece, setting the stage for an argument that would echo through the ages. And right out of the gate, you notice something kind of strange. This is not your typical, hey friends, hope you're doing well. No way. Paul's introduction is long, it's dense, it's just packed with theology. And you have to ask why. Well, it's because he's writing to a church in Rome that he's never actually met. He's got to establish his credentials from the get-go, not for his own sake, but for the sake of the message he carries. Okay, so that leads us perfectly into our first major section here. Before we can even get to the message, we really have to understand the messenger. And Paul doesn't introduce himself with, a resume or a list of accomplishments. Instead, he uses this really specific 3-part identity. Just think for a second about the titles Paul picks for himself. He could have bragged about his incredible education, but nope. Instead, he leads with these 3 key things: a bondservant, a called apostle, and someone who is consecrated for the gospel. And believe me, each one of these terms is just loaded with meaning. So let's take that first one, bondservant. To our modern ears, that might sound, pretty demeaning, right? But for Paul, this was a badge of absolute honor. It meant he had total allegiance to Christ. It's like what Augustine would write later. There's this amazing paradox here. In this complete service, Paul finds true freedom. So it's not about being owned, it's about belonging to the one true Lord. And then there's called apostle. I mean, what does that even mean? This wasn't some career path he chose. Paul is making it crystal clear that his authority didn't come from a human committee or his own ambition. Nope, it was a direct, divine commission from the risen Christ himself, the one he had actually seen. So in short, it was all grace. All right, so that's the messenger. We've got a handle on who Paul is. Now let's switch gears and focus on the message itself, the gospel. What is this good news that Paul feels so set apart to deliver? It's not just a collection of ideas. It's got these ancient roots and a really specific core to it. And this is such a key point. The gospel isn't actually new news. Paul immediately ties it back to promises made way back in the Old Testament. A great way to think about it is that the Old Testament is like the root, that's the promise. And the New Testament is the fruit, that's the fulfillment. It's all one big unified story. And here we hit on something absolutely crucial. See, unlike a lot of worldviews that are all about teachings or philosophies, the Christian gospel is fundamentally about a person. Theologian John Stott put it perfectly. Christianity is Christ. Everything else is just on the outside, the circumference. The gospel at its heart is all about God's Son. So Paul then breaks down who this Son is, and he does it in these 2 sort of parallel stages. First, you have his earthly life. Sometimes people call this the stage of humiliation, where he's a descendant of King David. But then everything changes with the resurrection. He enters this new stage, the stage of exaltation, where he's appointed Son of God with power. Now, this is a really important clarification. The resurrection didn't make Jesus the Son of God, like he was just a human who got a big promotion. Not at all. He was always the Son. What happened was a transition in his status. He went from being the Son in weakness and humility here on earth to being the Son reigning with all power and authority. But what's the point of all this? What's the end game? Well, Paul says it's to bring about the obedience of faith among all the nations. Now, what that most likely means isn't just, nodding your head in agreement. It means a real living faith that can't help but produce a life of obedience. And it's all for the glory of Christ's name. Okay, here we go. We've now arrived at the absolute heart of this entire introduction. In fact, many people see this as the thesis statement for the entire book of Romans. Paul is about to bring everything together and tell us why he is so incredibly bold about this message. And he makes this powerful, totally countercultural statement, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel." I mean, think about it. In the Roman Empire, which valued power and status and honor above all else, talking about a crucified Messiah from some backwater province, that could easily be seen as shameful, ridiculous even. But Paul, he is completely and utterly confident. So, why? And here's why.
The reason he's not ashamed is because he knows what the gospel actually is. It's not just another philosophy or a set of rules to live by. It is the very power of God for salvation. It does what Roman armies and Greek philosophers and all the religious rituals in the world could never do. And the best part? This power is available to every single person who believes.
So what makes the gospel so powerful? It's because in it, a righteousness of God is revealed. Now hold on, because this is one of the most important and most debated phrases in the entire letter. Scholars have seen it a few different ways. Is it one of God's attributes, like his justice? Or is it a legal status that he gives to believers? Or maybe it's his saving action, his power at work in the world. Honestly, it might even be a little bit of all three. This very idea is what lit the match for the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther was absolutely terrified of God's righteousness. He saw it as this impossible standard he could never meet. But then he had this breakthrough. He realized it wasn't a standard to meet, but a righteous status from God, a gift you just receive by faith. And it changed everything. In his own words, it was like being born again and walking into paradise through open gates. Paul then adds this little phrase that this righteousness is revealed from faith to faith. And yeah, it's a bit tricky. What does he mean? Does it mean it's all about faith from start to finish? Or maybe a progression from the kind of faith in the Old Testament to the faith of the New, or even moving from a little bit of faith to a greater faith? While the experts debate the exact mechanics, the main point is crystal clear. It's all about the absolute centrality of faith. All right, so let's start to pull this all together. Why have we spent all this time on just the opening 17 verses? It's because right here, in this short little space, Paul has laid the entire foundation for the massive, world-changing argument that's about to come. So think of it like this. These are the foundational pillars that Paul has just built for us. You've got the messenger, a servant called directly by God. You've got the message. It is all about the person of Jesus Christ. You've got the method. It's received entirely by faith. And you've got the power. It reveals a righteousness that comes directly from God. Every single major theme in the rest of this letter is going to flow from this incredible starting point. So after we've broken down this incredibly dense, powerful, and, well, world-changing introduction, all the analysis kind of gives way to a more personal question. When you get past all the theology and the history, what feelings, if any, does this message stir up in you? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.